Well, hello, I'm Catherine Millett with ETS's Policy Evaluation and Research Center. On behalf of ETS and the College Promise Program, I'm delighted to welcome you to ETS's and College Promise virtual convening. We are excited to have you with us for the multi-day Zoom event. Before we turn to the formal program, I would like to go over some logistical matters. We are doing a Zoom webinar, and you will see that your video and sound are turned off. We welcome your interactions with the panels, and we ask that you use the Zoom Q&A feature to ask questions. Throughout the meeting, we will provide contextual materials via the chat box. If you are having tech issues, please ask for help in the Q&A or send an email to info@collegepromise.org, where our colleagues will assist you. I'd like to introduce Maria Evans. Maria will be sketchnoting during our live event, and Maria joined us in 2019 for depicting the ecosystems of support and financial sustainability for 5 College Promise populations. Maria's sketches from the 2019 event are on the website, and Maria's work, which will illustrate our discussions, will be available tomorrow morning via the website. Is it possible to spotlight Maria so that she can just say hi to everyone? Well, we may not be able to spotlight Maria, but we hope Maria is home working on this.
Can you hear me, Catherine?
I can hear you, Maria.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here. I don't think I have the option to unvideo myself, but thank you.
Well, great. Maria does an amazing job of capturing our conversations and the ideas that come out. So I really do encourage you to take a look at, oh, there you are, Maria.
Here I am. Hi, everybody.
Great, great. So wonderful, Maria. We'll look forward to seeing what you hear and see over our time together. So
Terrific.
Thanks, Maria.
You're welcome.
So we are on social media, and we hope that you will post to the various social media outlets. Here are the hashtags for the event. Hashtag Promise Ecosystems 2021, hashtag College Promise, hashtag ETS, and hashtag Student Ecosystems. Now I would like to ask my ETS colleague, Michael Nettles, the Senior Vice President and Edmund W. Gordon Chair of the Policy Evaluation and Research Center at ETS, to officially kick off our program. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to our conference on Expanding Promise, depicting the ecosystems of support and financial sustainability for 5 College Promise populations. And I want to thank Catherine and our team at ETS and Martha Cantor and her colleagues at the College Promise organization for our collaboration over the past 6 years, taking a look at population groups as well as financial sustainability. You know, we started our journey together with College Promise about 6 years ago, when we thought that as the College Promise initiative spread across the country, there would be a need for us to consider ways to pay for them. At that time, there were only 95 or so College Promise initiatives in 2016, but now there are over 350, and we have watched them emerge with different approaches to financing students to attend. You know, our focus initially was on finances. We thought that if we could generate the kind of money that College Promise initiatives needed, that would be a huge contribution to the spread of College Promise initiatives and take some of the burden off of students and the government for paying for college tuition and fees and other types of support. we learned early in our process that students had different types of needs, and there were ways to categorize student needs by looking at their conditions and circumstances. And in this day of enlightened intersectionality, we recognize that this is a complex task, but we are venturing to try to address that challenge for students across the country. The focus now is more on students than finances, although in this particular collaboration with College Promise, we're always thinking about how to pay for it. So with that, I want to welcome you all. We are expecting over 300 people to attend this conference today, tomorrow, and next Wednesday, June 9th. The magic time to keep in mind is 1 p.m. That's what time we'll start every day of this conference. So we look forward to some very interesting and exciting panels. We have some new people participating with us and some people who have been with us through the entire journey. So we're looking forward to some exciting sessions and looking forward to learning about 5 new population groups. With that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Catherine, to get us started in understanding our population groups and also introducing our first session.
Thank you, Michael. So in 2018, College Promise and ETS embarked on a new undertaking. While we agreed that it was important to continue our partnership focused on College Promise, we coupled it with the joint goal of having every student be able to get to, through, and beyond a post-secondary education. But we needed a new twist to our work. The twist would be to take a closer look at the approximately 20 million students in post-secondary education in the United States. Education is not a one-size-fits-all enterprise. So in 2019, we selected 5 student groups to focus on: traditional students, adult students, undocumented students, student veterans, and justice-impacted students. In 2019, we convened the design teams along with colleagues who represented a range of perspectives: higher education faculty, public policy perspectives, finance experts, practitioners, students. There were multiple outcomes of the 2019 event, including a research report, policy briefs for each of the 5 populations, and multiple webinars. I want to share with you just a couple of the key points that I took away from our discussions and that have helped me to think about the work that we continue to do. One was students were clear and firm that their financial needs extend beyond covering the cost of tuition and fees. Second, students shared that, quote, they did not know what they did not know, quote, about the resources available to them, the rules for accessing the resources, and sometimes the implication of the timing of when they accessed resources. Third, while many of the non-tuition and fee expenses were borne by all student groups, there was an intensity factor. For example, legal services were mentioned for each of the 5 student populations, but undocumented students and justice-impacted students told us about a more intense need for these services. And fourth, while we observed commonalities across the populations, we were able to highlight the important differences as well. And last, it was clear that resources are needed not just for students, but for the institutions and programs that implement and conduct College Promise programs. So financing this College Promise opportunity is more than just helping students pay for their education. It's thinking about the systems and supports that need to be paid for. Well, no sooner had we announced the 2019 design teams when we were encouraged to start a second set of 5 populations. In fact, when Michael Nettles and I told Walt McDonald, the CEO of ETS, about the 2019 populations, he said, "Catherine, what about first gen? I'm a first gen." And I said, okay, Walt, when we start the next set, first gen are the first on the list. So we settled on the 5 populations that are the focus of the convening this year. First generation students, students in or aged out of foster care, students with disabilities, student parents, and students needing academic support. Early on, Michael, Martha, and I decided that rather than have our teams write these papers, that we would elect a design team approach. We invited 3 colleagues to form the anchor of the design team, typically an academic who studies the student population, an individual with a finance perspective, and a practitioner. And we asked the core team members to add a student and to invite other colleagues to round out their teams. Our charge was the following: to identify key data points about their student population. Second, to develop customized ecosystem models of support to better understand the needs of and the possible supportive services and approaches available to their respective populations. And third, to develop tailored ecosystems that will serve as a guide and a framework for understanding the coordinated solutions that are possible in optimizing the support network of their respective populations. So today we will hear about the emerging work of our 33 colleagues from the 5 design teams. So here are the 2021 design teams. The first generation student team. Students in or aged out of foster care design team. Students with the disabilities design team. Student parent design team. And students needing academic support design team. On behalf of College Promise and ETS, we want to thank our colleagues for the great work that they are doing. In the coming year, we also will be working at College Promise and ETS to join together the 2019 and the 2021 teams. These 10 populations collectively are important ones that we want to advance knowledge about and to continue to focus on. So with that, I'd like to introduce our colleague, Martha Cantor, the CEO of College Promise and the U.S. Undersecretary of Education from 2019 to 2013. Martha, thank you for everything.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. I bring greetings to you on behalf of thousands of Promise leaders that are in 338 local communities across 47 states and from 31 statewide Promise programs that also include Washington, D.C. Just a little bit about us. We began, as Catherine and Michael have said, 6 years ago to make, at a minimum, the first 2 years of education beyond high school universal and freely available to our nation's students. Community colleges led the way in those early years, and the Promise movement morphed to include 4-year colleges and universities and hundreds of communities across the country. College Promise is driven by equity to close the gaps that especially impact low-income and students of color, gaps that are holding students back from the promise of post-secondary educational opportunity to advance their unique American dreams. In 2015, we identified 53 College Promise programs. You might have heard of Kalamazoo, El Dorado, Long Beach Promise. These were a few of the early programs that led the way. And today, local and state Promise leaders from San Diego to San Antonio to Pittsburgh to Boston, and from states as diverse as California and Arkansas, are working together to enable millions more students to enter, complete, and succeed in college, career, and community life, especially now as we recover from the COVID pandemic. In 2015, President Obama asked now First Lady Dr. Jill Biden to join forces with Governor Jim Geringer to serve as the honorary chair and vice chair of the College Promise National Advisory Board. And they've guided our goal to identify, grow, and support local and state Promise programs, and that's what we'll continue to do. But we know it's not enough. Today, the Promise movement is often called free community college or simply free college. Free is the galvanizing buzzword that draws students into college, into their dream. And our early work with ETS identified a range of models that you saw on the slide to pay for college tuition and fees. For us, free equals paid for. We know that paying for tuition and fees does not cover the full cost of college, nor is it enough to cover the student supports that enable the successful transitions from school and work, or school or work, to and through college and the career students will have. So going forward, we envision a robust federal-state partnership for Promise programs to build on the local and statewide designs and strategies and best practices that are working for students. Today, we are grateful for the awesome work of the 5 new design teams you saw and you see on the slide. They are drawn from students, as Catherine and Michael have said, scholars in colleges and universities, finance experts, and Promise leaders, all here to help us understand and deliver solutions for the 5 diverse populations that are the focus of this conference. Work that will deepen and expand the Promise ETS Student Ecosystem Initiative. We want to know what are the common and distinctly unique programs, services, and redesigns that are going to most benefit these students. And to do this, we wanted students from diverse populations to inform the work of the 5 design teams that you'll hear from today, to center student voices prominently in the College Promise movement. Now we're going to hear firsthand from our students about their needs, the opportunities they face, the barriers they've pushed through to pursue their pathways to, through, and beyond college. And most importantly, what actions we can take to help millions more students learn all they can to complete their certificates and degrees for success in their chosen careers, communities, and states. I'm now proud to introduce the moderator of our student panel. Hailing from the San Francisco Bay Area, Alex Sheban is an award-winning filmmaker, producer, writer, and photojournalist. He transferred from Foothill Community College and graduated from the University of Southern California. Alex began his career making documentaries to raise public awareness about the effects of inequities and inequalities on American youth and families. In his films, Alex has chronicled the impacts of music therapy for children with autism, college mentorship, and fitness programs for people with physical disabilities. And after many years in the making, in 2017 with executive producer Dan Rather, Alex premiered his first major documentary, Fail State, a film about the student loan crisis, capturing the diverse and troubling experiences of students burdened with insurmountable student debt who attended for-profit colleges. For his investigative work on Fail State, Alex was awarded the 2019 William Randolph Hearst Award for Outstanding Investigative Reporting. He's already begun work on a new film as he continues to strengthen student protections and raise student voices, which is what this panel is about. Alex, take it away.
Thank you, Martha. I really appreciate that. I guess a quick note, I've been working with Martha for many years, and I guess it's been a dream of mine to be working so close with her. And she was actually one of, I believe it was my former chancellor of Foothill De Anza Community College. This is right before she went to the Obama administration. So yeah, thank you, Martha, for that introduction. I guess since we have a little bit, we're limited by time, I'm gonna try to go quick with my introduction. So, you know, I'm a filmmaker, but I also consider myself a student advocate. So as a student advocate, my work focuses entirely on elevating student voices. And I came to this conclusion or just this opinion because I understood that behind every single dollar of student loan debt in this country, there's a person with friends, family, and dreams. And, you know, that's why I'm so honored to be the moderator on this panel with such courageous, smart, and inspiring voices. I mean, I think these students and former students, and then just students everywhere, always need to be a part of the conversation. So let's just begin quickly. Let's start with introducing these panelists. Martin, could you start with an introduction on yourself?
Hi there. My name is Martin Hernandez. I am a student with Alamo Community Colleges in St. Phillips and San Antonio, Texas. And I returned to college 20 years after I initially graduated from high school. And I'm a musician.
Thank you, Martin. Tamara, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Tamari Ray. I'm 20 years old. I am a recent graduate at Philanthropy State. I'm transferring to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And I guess my role here is to speak on the student support that's needed to keep students in college with, promise programs and things of that nature.
Emily? Do we have Emily here?
Sorry,
Okay.
forgot about that. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Tarkanish, and I am finishing up my last year in a PhD program at the University of Connecticut. I also identify as a student with a disability. I experienced a severe traumatic brain injury right before I came to college, and my current research involves students with disabilities. So hopefully I can share today some of my experiences as well as reflect on some bigger systemic issues students all over are experiencing.
Waukesha?
Hello, everyone. My name is Waukesha Wilkerson, and I'm in my last semester at Sacramento State University, earning a bachelor's degree in psychology. I am a single mom of 3 children, and I'm here on behalf of student parents across the country.
Thank you. Angelique?
Hi, everybody. My name is Angelique Salzan, and I'm representing foster youth in and aged out of the foster care system. I went to Binghamton University and got my bachelor's in psychology and recently graduated with my master's in policy management from Georgetown University. Excuse me.
Thanks, Angelique. Okay, let's start with my questions then. Martin, I'm going to start with you. You decided to go to college later in life, and you're a voice for so many students who made the same decision to go while having a full-time job and a family. What has that been like for you?
It does pose some challenges, especially when you're coming back into the education system after such a bit of a delay, if you will. It seems that when you have some of the entrance exams and some of the exams you have to take to kind of get a baseline of where you are, even though you fall right within the spectrum of right there, right on the cusp. And if your target goal is like, you've got to score 75 and you hit a 74, you actually have to go backwards. So there are some challenges that you do face, especially trying to remember everything after, in my case, 20 years. In addition to the whole juggling the balance of being a student, being a parent, being a full-time worker, things like that. All of that does come into play, and it does have a bit of an impact. It makes it substantially more difficult to do.
And just a quick follow-up, Martin, has there been points where it's been scary for you going through college?
Absolutely. College requires a certain level of dedication and perseverance. You have to be willing to allocate time out of your life. And for me directly, I can tell you that it impacts, me being a college student has a direct and profound impact on my child and my wife, because if I'm not working, I'm in class, that's time away from them. And it does have an impact on them, which in turn has an impact on the family dynamic, which can impact me, because now that's more stress while I'm not allocating enough time to my son. I'm not spending enough time with my family. And that kind of eats at your mind, in addition to making sure you go to work, making sure that you're doing all your homework and whatnot. So yes, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Thanks, Martin. Emily, my question is for you now. In speaking with you before this panel, you said something to me that I think, embodies one of the major shortcomings in our current student support system. I mean, quoting you, you said, "No one told me about disability services in college." Your own perspective here is so important. And to ask you a question that might be hard to answer emotionally, but it'd be really important to share. I mean, can you take us to a moment in college where you really struggled as a person with a disability?
Absolutely. So like I said, I endured a severe traumatic brain injury in high school, which affected my cognition, like my memory, my processing speed, my sustained attention, a lot of my cognitive functions. So I got to college and I would take classes that didn't require processing speed or short-term memory, like English classes and history classes. I would go home, I would take longer to do my work, but I would get good grades, A's and B's, great. And then I would put in the same amount of effort, if not even more, in a class like math or science where it was tests, timed tests, and I never finished a single one. It was so challenging for me, and I felt so frustrated because I worked my tail off to be a good student, but there was this discrepancy, and I didn't know why. I honestly didn't even realize it was necessarily related to my disability because, again, I was doing well in my other classes. And in my 4 years in college, not one person said, "Hey, have you heard of disability services?" Even though I was very vocal about having a traumatic brain injury. So I think people knew that I had, a disability, but for whatever reason, those services just weren't advertised. And I felt really alone, because I didn't tell anyone why I was doing so poorly in certain classes and so well in the others. And I definitely felt alone, and I felt unsupported in a sense. And I think that really impacted, my passion. Once I did find out about disability services and, my master's program, I was really angry that nobody told me about it because my grades sure would have looked a lot differently. And I also really wish that there was community to talk about it because it was an evolution in finding, myself as a person with a disability who was an academic and who could complete college and everything. So I really think it would have been a lot easier for me if I knew about services as well as knew about other students who use services. Because it was frustrating as well as lonely not knowing about either.
Thanks, Emily. Angelique, as a person who grew up as a foster youth, can you take us through your journey going to college? I mean, what was it like?
Yeah, so my experience may not be the same for every foster youth. They have a different experience when they enter the academic space. So I want to say that at the outset. I had some support from my biological family, but in terms of the process, it was very much on me as a student to make sure the paperwork was in, to make sure everything was filled out, and pretty much being my support system as I went through undergrad. However, I had some support services. I got some scholarships, and there were resources provided to me that helped me and put a cushion under me and a safety net, really, to help me through a lot of adults who supported me in my foster care agency, communicated with the institution in terms of tuition payments. There were some cases where my colleagues in foster care who had their classes dropped and weren't able to continue on. And I really got support from those folks to ease the burden of responsibility to me as a student, fresh out of high school and going into undergrad. So while it was difficult and it was stressful, there were certain supports in place to help me really figure it out and really make sure that I had everything in place so that the stress levels could stay low and I could focus mainly on my academics.
Thanks. Tamari, when we spoke, you said something to me that really stood out, and it was also just inspiring to me. You said, "I want to be an advocate for students like me." And so my question based on that is, what led you to wanting to be that voice?
Well, in high school and a lot of, throughout my life, my childhood, I've never really felt as if I had a voice. I was always shy. I didn't feel like people would ever listen to me until more, recently I've started to push that is like, and I've had a lot of support, like a lot of teachers in high school, one specific teacher, but I'm not going to get into that. But he really let me know that you can make a difference. You have a voice, you're very optimistic. You have a strong voice. You're very passionate in what you believe in and what you speak about. So using that and trying to help people, because that's always been my thing, is I've always wanted to just be the person that people can rely on for help and advice and things of that nature. So me advocating for people like me is kind of like, I feel like that's my calling. I feel like that's what I like to do. I like to help people and let them know about things that they probably didn't know about. Sort of like how Emily was saying, she wants to let people know that, there are disability services, just as I want to let people know that, you can go to college, even if you didn't have the financial means of going to college, you can, there's promise programs and scholarships and all kinds of things. So, that's kind of why I want to be an advocate for people like me.
To do one more follow-up, Tamari, go back into what we were talking about. You said something also that was just really important, and I had a very similar experience in community college with that. But you mentioned how friends and people you knew had to drop out of community college. Was that the main contributing factor to becoming this voice, or was there something else?
I feel like that was a lot of was a big contributing factor, because when you're in college and your friends leave and you're kind of lonely, you feel kind of stuck, like they're talking about other things while you're talking about, oh, I have this 10-page research paper that's due, so and so and that, so I think that a lot of promise programs and a lot of colleges in general should have more or bigger support systems for students. I know, for instance, at Philanthropy and like with Tennessee Promise, we have a program that's kind of attached to Tennessee Promise. It's called Tennessee Achieves, where you have your own mentor. They check in with you. They, offer you services. They offer you scholarships. Not offer you, but let you know about these kind of things. And I feel like a lot of my friends didn't take that and utilize it when it was really helpful for me, especially because I wouldn't have been where I am today without my mentor. So I feel like me letting my friends, or me not letting them know, like, hey, use this person, use this and that, kind of pushed them away, or not pushed them away, but they didn't have the motivation to keep going into college, and they felt as if they didn't have support and all this and that. So I guess I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Tamari. Thank you. I guess, Waukesha, you are a parent of 3, and you told me you had so many false starts going to college, but this time you are succeeding. I mean, why is it different?
Thanks, Alex. I think what is important to highlight for post-traditional students like myself, who are student parents, is that we do have a lot of false starts because we're not aware, similar to what Emily and Tamari were mentioning, of resources that are available specifically for our identity. So I was able to locate resources such as Project Self-Sufficiency in Orange County, California, that provides wraparound services to single parents that are attending college. And with those services, they led me to additional supports that were available to parenting students, such as referrals to scholarship opportunities, food pantry support services, rental assistance support services, childcare support services, things that I didn't necessarily qualify because of a lot of those resources that are provided by the government or state are really income-based. But I was a working student parent, which kind of put me in the middle, where I made too much to qualify for services, but not enough to really have enough to support myself and my family while I pursued higher education. I think that once this last time when I attended college, that was the unique factor that made me more successful, is because I finally had a support system. But similar to Emily, had I known about these services 3 years, 4 years, 5 years ago, during one of those many false starts at college, I feel like I could have, been more successful sooner.
Thanks, Waukesha. Angelique, I think to slightly modify the question I wrote, because I loved what you said earlier, but in our discussion, I think last week, you said something along the lines of that your story or your experience through college is basically unique, or that for every success of foster youth through college, there are a lot of people who don't make it through college. Can you talk about that and how the system needs to change to get more foster youth through college?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the question, Alex. I think it's really assessing what the needs are of that particular student when it comes to, you know, the adults and folks at the agency who are involved with that youth, if they do still have a connection to their agency, hopefully that they do. But I think it's really catering to that specific student and providing resources within that agency to see through their success. I think the field is doing a better job at cultivating more space for foster youth to continue services within the agency and get more support, but there definitely needs to be an emphasis on education, because as we all know, education leads to self-sufficiency in some form or fashion, and foster youth really need that, because a lot of them don't have positive outcomes, or they do go to school and don't make it through to get the degree, or they don't know that their resources are there. So they're taking out loans and then they're not finishing. And so then you have this conundrum of students from CARE not really finishing their degrees and then being stacked with debt and then not being able to go on and have a successful career life. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to focus on what students need, whether it's mental health, whether it's housing, whether it's health related, to really make sure that the environment is right for academic success.
Thanks, Angelique. I guess, Emily, a very similar question. What needs to be done to support students like you?
Well, the short answer is a lot. A lot of things need to change. But I think two of the biggest ways that I think improvements can happen is, one, schools need to have awareness campaigns. I'm going to talk in a Spark Talk later today, and I'm going to tell everybody that at least 20% of undergraduates experience and self-disclose a disability. But more than likely, there's a lot more of us out there who, again, just aren't disclosing because of stigma, because of lack of awareness, fear. Every college needs to have loud and proud disability advocates. In addition, I think when we look at diversity offices, which are blowing up and doing awesome work on our campuses, but they don't always highlight disability, you know? I mean, lots of my friends, you know, work with the LGBTQ Center or the Center for Students of Color, or even there's a First Gen Club, but there wasn't necessarily a disability club. We recently started one at UConn, but before that, there wasn't one. And I think it's part of, again, lack of awareness, but that lack of awareness sends a big, loud message. It says, your disability, keep it behind closed doors. It's not part of diversity. And that's a problem. So I really think we need to spread awareness, and those campaigns cost money. So we definitely need, you know, national funding for national disability awareness programs. But then I think also supporting students with disabilities financially, because having a disability, it's not cheap. I mean, everybody experiences the hardships of paying for college, but whether it be having a disability and having to pay for doctor's appointments or medicine or therapy or tutoring or extra supports you need, that's on the student. Even getting documentation of your disability, which you need to have to get disability services, that's not free. In fact, it cost me thousands of dollars, and I didn't know where to get that money at first. So I really think through awareness campaigns, as well as systematically creating funds to support the needs of students with disabilities, I think those are two great places to start.
Thanks, Emily. Waukesha, speaking for student parents like yourself, and generally for all students who need specific types of support to succeed, how can we actually lessen the burden on students to get that assistance?
That's so funny you asked. I was just typing a response to one of the questions from Brandy about some of the actions that staff can take daily on college campuses. one of the things that I think it's really important to a way to get resources to student parents specifically is identifying them as a community. I had no idea that there was a term for people like me that were parents who were returning back to college. Had I known sooner, then I would have been able to navigate through resources from people who were experiencing the same challenges as myself, which Project Self-Sufficiency gave me that. I was able to meet a local community of, actually, I live in an apartment complex, and maybe half of the occupants of the apartments were also students. So immediately upon receiving those services, I was connected to my neighbors who I otherwise would not have had any interactions with outside of, being college students. Another thing that I think it's important on college campus communities to get resources to student parents is, after identifying them, is to destigmatize some. So one of the resources that I used, and it was, and I received a lot of second looks because I would use the food pantry on my campus, especially when the onset of COVID. Prior to COVID, maybe I had not, I hadn't been made aware of the food pantry. I didn't see myself as someone in need of the assistance of the food pantry. But utilizing that resource, I realized there was so much nutrition, so many nutritional things there that were just free. And it really helped with my expenses at home, being able to have access to that. So one of the initiatives, because I also work with my community college that I graduated from, is rebranding the food pantry. If maybe instead of a food pantry, it's nutritional services, because a lot of people don't see themselves as people who need a food pantry per se. I think language is really, really important when you're trying to connect with students, and no one, we don't want to feel like charity cases. And that was the difference this time with starting college, is that the organizations that I partner with, such as Project Self-Sufficiency, Ascend at the Aspen Institute, they treated me as an equal, as a colleague, as a partner in my success, and not as someone that they were donating services to.
And Waukesha, I'm trying to figure out a question to really prompt what you said the other day that I just loved and told you I wanted to steal. But yeah, like this idea of how all these programs, students need to dig into it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that was part of my answer too. It's like a solution to some of the issues that we have with getting resources and services to students is the way we look at it, because we expect students to go and find these services and then sign up for them, when it should be the other way around, because essentially we're entitled to them. So if you can identify students at admissions as someone who, for example, for Emily, who needs disabled student services, maybe there's a checkbox where she wants to share that information, then she's automatically enrolled. So there's an opt-out option as opposed to an opt-in. And that way you capture many more students who need the service, who maybe don't even know that they exist.
Thanks, Waukesha, you did it. That's what I wanted. How much time do we, I have one last question for Martin, but do we have time to answer some of these audience questions? Are there, I know there were some long ones and some have been answered already. Okay, so we should wrap. I guess, Martin, for you to finish off this panel,
Yes, sir.
For students that come from all walks of life, you, Waukesha, Tamari, Emily, Angelique, the whole gamut of different people who go and aspire to get a college degree. For everyone listening here today, like the participants that are attending the symposium, what do they need to know as they look to better increase the support that we give to students?
I think, and we're starting to see the steps in the right direction, but I think that the words and the mentality of this is the way things have always been kind of needs to change. A bunch of things that we see and that I see as a student now, I'm seeing progress made in some of the clubs that were being discussed earlier and things of that nature. But as I had mentioned in a couple of responses to the questions that I put, and it's just that regardless of what's going on, some of the mindset and the mentality is still, well, that's just the overall college experience, deal with it. That mentality has to change in order to be have the students more successful and have the universities and colleges thrive. Some of that old mentality and that old set in stone mindset of, well, things will never change, really needs to be looked at. And just as everything else around us is evolving, technology, society, communication, everything, we need to take a look at that. And that needs to evolve with the times as well. It needs to catch up. And like I said, we're seeing progress. I think we just need to see more progress and at a steadier rate.
All right, thank you, Martin. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you everyone for listening in and hearing these voices. I hope this is one of these successful symposium that we can do to just help millions of more students in this country. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you College Promise, thank you ETS. This has been such a pleasure and an honor.
Sorry about that. I want to thank Tamari, Emily, Waukesha, Angelique, Martin, and Alex. And now I'd like to turn to my colleague, Michael Nettles, who is going to moderate the panel in conversation, post-secondary perspectives on the role of College Promise in supporting different student populations. For this panel, we asked 3 colleagues to discuss how College Promise helps different student populations on their campus and the work that they do in their communities. So Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and good afternoon again, and welcome to the conference. I am really thrilled to have the opportunity this afternoon to welcome and introduce 3 colleagues who are leaders of college and universities across the country. We have Nancy Cantor, who's the Chancellor of Rutgers University at Newark, Constance Carroll, who is the Chancellor of San Diego Community College District, and Michael Flores, Chancellor of Alamo College District. These are leaders who have been passionate in their conviction to help students succeed through college, and they have experience in supporting students financially and otherwise, and putting in place systems that students require to be successful. This is an ongoing challenge, and they are working with some of the most challenging population groups in the country. So we're delighted to be able to hear firsthand about their experience and get their advice and recommendations as we chart a course forward of financial sustainability. Let me turn first to Nancy Cantor. And Nancy, please make some opening remarks and also give us a sense of what the population groups that we're addressing in this conference and your experience and sense about financial sustainability.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here with everybody. Such an important topic. So let me give a little context for Rutgers University Newark and then how we've integrated a College Promise into our mission and our strategy. We are a highly diverse institution, majority Pell eligible undergraduates, majority BIPOC population, a lot of first generation students, a lot of commuting students, undocumented students coming out of our prison education program and re-entering, a wide variety of students aging out of foster care, parents, etc. We are also an anchor institution in New Jersey's largest city, Newark, New Jersey. And this is a predominantly city of color. It is built on generations of immigration and migration. It's built as the architecture of segregation has built every major urban center in this country, around with wealthy suburbs and lots of large corporations and tremendous cultural vibrancy and eds and meds, etc., but a population really targeted in terms of the wealth gap in this country and all that goes with it. We have a very activist, wonderful mayor, Ras Baraka, and he has really galvanized the entire city and all the major universities and hospitals and corporations and cultural institutions to be anchor institutions. So I give that framework because that's really what our college promise is very much embedded in our ability to be an anchor institution. We are the backbone organization for what's called the Newark City of Learning Collaborative, which is a collaborative, again, across sectors and with City Hall to try to increase the post-secondary attainment rate of residents of Newark. We also create pathways from our wonderful New Jersey County colleges to our four-year institution, and our college promise is heavily aimed at creating and cementing those pathways. That really puts our college promise as part of the ecosystem of developing equitable growth. And Newark, as a large city in New Jersey, is committed to creating jobs, to creating career paths, and to creating post-secondary education. We have a Hire by Live local initiative that all of the major anchors are committed to. So I give all that as our context. And then in terms of supporting our college promise, we have our college promise in place for any Newark resident with an adjusted family income of $60,000 or below, a full lasting tuition scholarship, but we also have lots of other programs and any community college transfer, I should say, as well with that adjusted family income. We also have a lot of incubating programs. We have an honors living learning community that is completely dedicated to creating the kinds of social justice leaders for the next generation. We have students out of our NJ STEP prison education program. We have a large undocumented student population that we support, students with disabilities, aging out of foster care, student parents, all part of the honors living learning community. And that is a very signature, innovative program for us to test out the kinds of ecosystem that you're all talking about in this wonderful three-day symposium about when we do design properties. The final thing I would say, and then come back later to more details, but turn to my great colleagues, is that we really believe in what we call a kind of systemic approach that goes across student affairs, disabilities, counseling, enrollment management, financial aid, academic advising, all brought together. So a systemic approach, but then our view is that you have to individualize that systemic approach to the individual student. And that's where I think both the intersectionality of the student populations that we're talking about today and the individualized support systems come into place. And we do this including the notion of how you create a pathway to careers. And that's where a lot of the large corporations in this area come in, and the cultural institutions, so that our students really go from home to college to career. I'll turn Mike back to you and then have more to say later.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Nancy. And let me turn now to Constance. Constance, you have experience with College Promise as well. Could you give us your opening remarks?
Yes, I will try to put our situation in perspective. We are the San Diego Community College District. We have 4 colleges enrolling approximately 100,000 students, which makes us one of the largest community college districts in California and the nation. And because we're San Diego, we have some special aspects of our district related to ethnicity, income, and citizenship. And we, when we implemented our Promise program, which we did as a pilot in 2016, we had certain notions in place as to what it would be for full-time, first-time students. And we had other requirements as well, a citizenship or a service requirement, community service requirement, and other things. And over time, our Promise program metamorphosed from the pilot of 186 students to now approximately 6,500 students today. What we've learned is that the Promise student population is not one size, and the Promise service obligations are not one size fits all. And I'll be happy to discuss some of the details of that later. But from the San Diego Community College District perspective, we are dealing with a highly diverse set of students who mirror our population. Our students are working. Many of them are parents. They're low income. Many students of color, many disabled. Many students are DACA students, and a very large number, because of our proximity to the Mexican border, are generally undocumented students. And so when we approached our Promise program, we took all of that into consideration. And we had to make some fundamental changes in our original notion, which I will also discuss later. But basically, our Promise program mirrors the community from an ethnicity standpoint this way. 50% are Latinx students. 15% are African American students. 17% are Asian American Pacific Islander students, and 18% are white students. So our biggest challenge has been how to address this diverse student population through an equity standpoint, which requires different treatments of different students in the population, and how to adjust our Promise requirements to the emerging needs and changes in the society around us. So I'll turn this back, and I look forward to talking about the specific issues a little bit later in the program.
Thank you very much, Constance. And now we've gone from east to west coast, and now we are going to the great Southwest with Michael Flores. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Michael, and colleagues. Yeah, we end up right in the middle, right in the state of Texas. So greetings from San Antonio. The Alamo Colleges is a 5-college community college district, and we, San Antonio actually in the 2018 American Community Survey, there's a distinction of having the highest urban poverty rate proportionally in the United States. So we have competed, not a great distinction with Miami and Detroit for that. And so we are aware, one, of who we serve, and they mirror our population. Of our 65,000 students that we have enrolled this semester, 78% of those students are of color, and they come from every neighborhood within our community. We had Richard Reeves do kind of look at the socioeconomic strata of all of our groups, and all of our students come from either the urban core, suburban subdivisions, and so they very much mirror what our community looks like. When we look in particular at what we're seeking to do, when I say the 65,000, I often in these panels talk about we're the largest higher ed provider in South and Central Texas, but I think we're the largest producer of talent within our community. And I think that that is a key distinction, especially for urban and diverse areas. We know that there are structural challenges and inequities, but we know that more than anything else, an educational credential can change the trajectory of an individual, but of a family in particular. So promise, when we look at what we call Alamo Promise for us, is particularly critical in doing that. And I'll give you a couple of proof points. In the first year that we recruited, our goal was to have 3,000 Alamo Promise scholars. We were fortunate that we front-loaded everything and began actually prior to March of 20, when the pandemic arrived in earnest here in San Antonio. So we had our students complete the online application form, and they completed the FAFSA as part of that. If they were DACA, they completed the state app. And so they were on board and ready to go. San Antonio was one of a handful of urban centers that actually had a 6% increase in FAFSA completion in spring of 20. And we attribute that, and actually our daily newspaper attributed that largely to Alamo Promise. All of the work of us being in those 25 phase 1 high schools, which are public comprehensive high schools. We started with those phase 1 schools because they had a college enrollment rate of less than 50%. San Antonio's college matriculation rate is about 47%, and our goal is to take that up to 70% over a 5-year trajectory. That is, our revenue streams are either public, which we have the city and the county, which are contributing to that, along with Alamo colleges. Then we have private dollars, and that is about 1/4 of the necessary funding. And then 3/4, which may be no surprise, are actually federal funds through the federal FAFSA application, Pell Grants, and other need-based components. So we're now beginning the second iteration of Promise. But I think that as we look at what does that provide, it is being able to ensure that students, and for us, that students can opt in. And oftentimes we find, in particular during COVID, that it isn't solely the tuition. There are other considerations, right? How many hours less will I work? Who's going to help me pay for childcare? Can I ask my mom or a family member to assist me with those needs? And then what are the other things that impact my pocketbook? So it's a whole calculation, but glad to be here this afternoon. And thank you, Michael, and glad to be here with Constance and Nancy as part of this conversation.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Nancy, you described a really comprehensive approach to addressing student needs. On this panel today, you're the 4-year university. Do you can you give us a sense of the money, the finances that it takes for you to develop such a comprehensive set of initiatives to support students? We have seen students rely over the years on Pell Grants and loans to attend college and to try to complete college. You've got 4 years of support and sometimes longer
Right.
to provide.
Yeah, so what we've been doing is, as I know all our colleagues are doing, is, if you will, cobble together from all the different sources that we can for these students. So in terms of pure tuition costs, and of course, I hope that, and I know this panel and others will talk about the fact that that doesn't go anywhere near the full cost for our students to come to college. So, but in terms of pure tuition, we cobble together support from the New Jersey tuition assistance grants, from Pell, for our undocumented students, from a whole variety of external philanthropy that we can get. And then we put a tremendous amount of our own operating budget each year. So we have spent, I should have had the number on top of my head, Michael, but we have spent since 2016, when we put Run to the Top in, we've spent I think it's something like 14 million of our own money, but I could be, exaggerating there, or under. but let us just say that each year we are putting more and more of our own operating budget to try to make up for the fact that, as we all know, Pell has not increased enough and needs to. And then there are students who are not eligible for various reasons. I mean, including, of course, our undocumented students, etc. Students coming out of our prison education program, we have prison education program that we coordinate in all of the state prisons in New Jersey, and then they come out and get bachelor's degrees at Rutgers Newark and across Rutgers, and those students have a lot of actual needs, justice impaired. What impacted? What I want to really emphasize, though, from the financing point of view, is the hidden costs of doing the systemic support systems that we're really talking about. So, for example, in our honor, one of the best things about our honors living learning community, but it's only a subset of our whole undergraduate population and run to the top population, is that they have not only tuition, but they've got housing and room and board and books. That is absolutely critical, for example, for our aging out of foster care students who need to have a place to live over a long period of time. It's true for many of our student parents. So one of the most poignant things is that when you support student parents with scholarships for housing, they can then use any money they have that they're working for childcare. And so that ends up being a critical piece. In terms of our student impact, justice impacted students, no question. But then there are a lot of issues of food insecurity. We have a major food pantry that we raise funds for, and I'm sure all my colleagues on this panel do as well. We have to think about coordinating in the Office of Student Disabilities, coordinating with local agencies and state agencies. So there are all those costs. So I'm not giving you actual numbers. I know I should feed you actual numbers, Michael, but let me just say that the set of costs is tremendous. And the student populations that you've picked, especially I think this year, have particular, what I will call a sort of clockwork or a puzzle of intersecting costs that are typically not paid for if we just have a simple promise program.
Yeah, so thank you, Nancy. We'll come back and find out some of your success stories, things that you're proud of that have happened with these population groups at Rutgers Newark. Constance, can we turn to you and talk a little bit about these student populations and the finances? How do you generate the resources, and what does it take to carry out the quality of education that you spoke about in San Diego?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in California, there have been two pieces of legislation that passed in the last 3 years, Assembly Bill 19 and Assembly Bill 2. And what that legislation does is to provide tuition waivers for eligible students, and the eligibility is defined as first-time, full-time. So the state focus has been immediate high school graduates whose tuition costs are paid. However, one of the major lessons we learned is that the greatest challenge our students in the Promise program, San Diego Promise, face is unit load. Unit to be a full-time student while also being a parent, sometimes homeless, almost all of the students are working and the like, adds a challenge that is difficult for a number of students. And the number of students who have the greatest challenge within that are African American and Latinx students. And so we have been working this way. we funded, self-funded our first pilot, Promise pilot in 2016. And that enabled us to learn a great deal about our students, what worked, what didn't work. Now with the state covering funding for the first time full-time students, we have backed into the challenge of unit load this way. We are now providing for part-time Promise student support, which costs us about a little under $1 million a year. I think it's about $800,000 a year to supplement the Promise funding for part-time categories of student, and those students tend to be former foster youth, formerly incarcerated students, returning adults who are not full-time, first-time students, DACA students, undocumented students, and the like. We have a continuous fundraising effort for those students. We are now at, I think, about $1.8 million in our fundraising and rising. We have a major fundraiser coming up in the fall. We have found that private philanthropy is a key. Not only do we have the public partnership with the state and private partnerships with some of the industries that provide funding for us, but we have personal and private support from philanthropists who simply want to make a difference in our community. So in California and in the San Diego Promise, those are the thirds: the state funding, the funding that we raise from philanthropists, and some industry funding.
Thank you. Michael, how much does it cost and where do you get the money?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is we did an economic impact study. So we commissioned a study to show what would be generated as a result of kind of the net new graduates and their annual earnings, and then what they would accumulate over their lifetime. And the reason we did that is we knew we were going to have to approach the private sector, right? Foundations and corporations for gifts. And we approach this as an economic development strategy. Promise is economic development because we're enhancing the number of credentials in our community. San Antonio has a distinction because we don't have enough local talent. And when we recruit firms, we end up importing talent. So we'd like to produce local grown talent for those new jobs, those high wage, high demand jobs. And then we use that study for the city and county government as well when we went for an ask to them. So our estimate is that over 5 years, it would cost about $122 million to serve 45 comprehensive high schools within our county, and that about 77 million of those, about 77 to 85 million of that is going to come from Pell. And then the remainder is going to be divided into thirds: a third from the city, third from the county, and a third from Alamo College's district. And then our third was going to be split between institutional resources, which both Nancy and Constance mentioned, and then also private donors, right? So we were going to have to go to private donors. We've been able to raise about $10 million privately. And then we also have in our budget then our institutional resourcing that we need. So I think that that's what we look at, right? The scale of the 122 million over a 5-year horizon. And then being able to message to folks what that would look like with that economic impact study: increase in sales tax, increase in property tax revenues by folks buying homes, increase in wages and that spend within the local community, because private developers do that all the time with our city and our county government. So our thought was, if you're going to do this for an economic development strategy, for a business locating here, why don't you do that for your own homegrown talent as a result for that investment?
Yeah. So thank you for that, Michael. I want to turn now to talk a little bit about your successes with any of the 5 population groups that we are featuring in this conference, because I think we can learn a lot from your experience. And you don't have to talk about all of them, but if you want to pick one or a few examples, and that will give us a sense of what it might take to succeed with more students. Now, it's difficult to generalize from anecdotes, but it's very, very helpful to think about it in those terms. Nancy, let's start with you.
So let me focus on first generation students, but really assume that from our perspective, the experiences often intersect across these groups. But let me focus there. One of the things that we've done as part of the systemic ecosystem built around Run to the Top is to really think about how do you create social capital networks of support for first generation students. So Michael talked very poignantly, I think, about the pathway to career, the talent production. That's exactly what we're about here. So we teamed up, for example, with Braven, which is a nonprofit that is a career leadership accelerator course for credit that many of our first generation students, and we have many, are taking, and many of our Run to the Top students are taking. And that then gives them career mentors out in the city of Newark, in the region, and a career workshop and a leadership workshop. And what we find is that those students have a 26% increase at likelihood of getting what are called strong first jobs with full benefits and pathways of success. 26% increase over what would be predicted nationally for that group of students. So that's one example of something I think that is absolutely critical. One of the things we find that's most interesting about first generation students is that they do not take advantage of all our on the ground support services at the same rate that many of our non-first generation students take advantage. And I think that's a huge thing we have to think about. So what we have put in place is a set of what we call my Rutgers University Newark website that is decoded by other students to get rid of jargon that goes across all the student support areas that we have, and that a student can access simply digitally by going online and looking at my Run. And it really makes a difference. And then we parallel with that with what we call Run for Success, which is our digital advising platform. And it maps out course trajectories for individual students. It has faculty and academic advisors and our care team from Student Affairs all hooked in with the student. And during COVID, this was particularly important so students could access it without coming on campus. And we learned actually it was an odd side effect, since I was telling Michael when we first got on that so many of our students were behind the digital divide. But once we provided the right kinds of supports, which we did substantially, what we found is that our students actually, our first gen students, would then access all of our services much more readily. And they and their families were accessing enrollment, registration, financial aid questions, filling out FAFSAs constantly, which we all know is extraordinarily complicated, all the things, legal services for our undocumented students. So I think it's really important that we make whatever support system we build is easily accessible, non-jargon, and that it doesn't assume that you will automatically access it. So we find ways for advisors, for care team folks, for counseling to reach out via that in a way that isn't stigmatizing. And I think one of the critical things for these populations is a destigmatization about getting help. You know, kids who aren't first gen, high income kids, they know how to get help. They grow up getting help all the time. They start on third base, right? Our students don't, and they don't ask for help unless we find ways to provide it easily.
Thank you, Nancy. And Constance, how about in San Diego? What are you finding? What is successful?
Yes, and I'll talk a little bit about the Latinx student population with an anecdote, with an example, as you suggested. First of all, we've found that the greatest challenges for students, in addition to the unit load that I mentioned earlier, are these: low self-esteem. Many of students in some of our promise categories have never envisioned that they would be a college graduate, that they would have a future, for many, many reasons. And we found also in working with parent groups that, but wrongly in this case, parents assume that college, community college, and others are too expensive. And so the outreach effort in finance is very, very important to explain that in California, the unit cost is $46 a unit. It's the most affordable in America. But even so, for students in the promise categories of low income, it's a bar too high still for them to reach. And so when they hear about the tuition waiver that comes with the Promise program, that quite frankly is a game changer in many sectors of the community, especially the Latinx community. What we do is to partner our Promise programs, which include a required summer bridge program so that students learn study skills, that students learn financial management, personal management issues, which are things to which they have never been exposed. We have special Promise counselors at each of our campuses. We have tutors who are dedicated to various Promise categories. And we have other support, which is critical to them, particularly textbook support. They receive textbook grants. And in California, with our tuition levels, textbooks can oftentimes be more expensive than tuition. Others have transportation costs, food costs, housing costs. So it's important to provide, as we do through our pantries and additional student grants, that kind of support. We also partner with some of our successful programs, since I'm going to be talking a little bit about a Latinx example, with our Puente program, which specializes in support for Chicano and other Latinx students. We have a program that's called HUBO, which stands for Hermanos Unidos, Brothers United, recognizing that the two most fragile categories of students are African American men and Latino men. And so through an equity lens, that requires special attention, special monitoring, and special support in order to make sure that through an equity effort, the playing field is actually leveled for those two categories. This works on data supported scale, and through an anecdote like this. We had a student trustee just a couple of years ago, I won't use his name, I should not, who was a DACA student. He was excellent at what he did, but he worked 5 part-time jobs, And the reason he did that was because he lived in fear that any day he was going to be deported. And so he needed to build up sufficient resources for that. He had low self-esteem, but the outreach efforts to him, because he was very talented, were very, very focused. And so he ran for student government. One, he became president of student government, and then later became a student trustee. Now, because of the special attention, the alignment with Puente program and some of the others, he not only graduated from one of our institutions, from City College, but he's now in his going into his senior year at Cal Berkeley. Things that would never have been possible had it not been for a Promise program, an outreach counselor who said, I understand that you have these interests and you are talented, brought him forward. And number two, connected him with very specific services that were aligned with his background, ethnic identification, real understanding of his financial need, because he was a DACA student. Things, happily, for DACA students are much better today than they were a few years ago, where fear was the common denominator. And we're very proud of him. I stay in touch with him. He will go all the way, all because of the San Diego Promise.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Constance. Michael, I see you smiling. You must have a happy story to tell us about.
Well, I just think that's affirming, and that's what Promise and what we do is all about, right? All of us together, collectively. Two things. One is, when we look at Promise in our first year during COVID, from those 25 high schools, we actually served more students year on year. So they increased by about 17% in FTIC enrollment, but our other schools actually declined. So I think that is really the power of Promise, whether students are Pell eligible or not. It's all in being able to connect with them and message that college is possible. The other is not only paying for the tuition or even the books as mentioned, it's about the whole ecosystem of support. And so we were fortunate that we actually stood up several initiatives before that, a case management model of one advisor to 300 students that follows them from their first to their final semester, pathways that are all built out for our transfer institutions, in which students now graduate only taking 65 hours for their 60-hour associate's degree, and then out of classroom support. So we started what we call advocacy centers at 2 of our colleges first. And then once we developed proof of concept, we stood that up at all 5. And so we have a student advocacy center network. And then we partnered with public sector entities to provide those services. So it's what we call, braided funding. So we're funding some of those things, but we're doing that in tandem with our medical school for health clinics, with our food bank for benefits navigators, in which we only pay for half of the positions, with United Way for a helpline that serves all 65,000 students, that this will be the first time we're actually going to fund part of it in year 3. So I think that's the whole part, is it's an ecosystem, but we are, as Nancy and Constance mentioned, we're one player of multiple players to be able to provide the wraparound support services that our students need, because we're serving them. The food bank is serving them, our public health hospital or authority is serving them, but we only see them from the lens. So why not co-locate and partner with those entities as we bring Promise students onto our campus?
Yeah, thank you for that, Michael and Nancy and Constance. One of the population groups that we're focusing on is students who have particular academic needs, or now every student has academic needs, but I guess the way to think about it is that in each of your locations, you have feeder high schools or school districts, and your work with College Promise must require some articulation and some communication with the places that are preparing students to enter. But even with that, what you have are students who come to you with skills in need of special support. And every time I think about that, I think about the programs that you've described, but also think about the financial resources that it must take for you to do that. So let's start with you, Constance, and move to Nancy and then Michael.
Yes. Our philosophy for San Diego Promise boils down to this, that it's important for students to have access to higher education. But the second piece is that the institution of higher education, in this case, a community college to which they come, should ensure their success. So success and access need to be twin priorities. We provide special Promise counselors at each one of our institutions. It's very important to have a focus on this population, not to simply bring them in and then allow them to blend in with the rest of the students. This is a special population with special needs, and so we provide special counseling. We also provide tutoring for students in the program, additional tutoring, and we provide a great deal of tracking. It's very important to follow the students and their individual needs and their progress so that we can do what is often necessary, and that is also initiate interventions when we see a student who is having difficulty. So it's one thing to have several thousand students in a Promise program. It's another to make sure that the attention they receive is individualized based upon the individual tracking of their progress. At the beginning of our Promise programs, we found that the underachieving populations of students were African American and Latinx. No surprise there. But what we have also found is that with these extra support and specialized tracking, those statistics, though still lower than the mainstream, are turning around very impressively. The other thing we have found with students in the program, in addition to the academic support they receive and the financial support they receive, is the need for attention to their esteem. And so we provide social opportunities for socialization and for the formation of friendships. It's very important for students in these categories not to feel that they are alone, or not to feel that they are a widget in some greater plan of measured student success, but that they truly enjoy themselves in the experience and elevate their self-esteem, along with the opportunities for group interaction. We do such things as provide special apparel for them at commencements. We have special Promise medallions for our students, as if they were a student club, and they love it. It makes them feel much more a part of the institution. We provide special celebrations for them so that they can meet with some of our Promise donors who inevitably increase their support once they actually see what this is all about. And what this is all about is individual people of all ages, because we do not have an age cutoff any longer, because there's so many returning adults. People who need to be celebrated should be celebrated, in addition to receiving the monitoring, the interventions, the tutoring, the specialized counseling, and everything else that provides wraparound services for them.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Constance and Nancy. On academic preparation, And
Yeah, and I want to build on the asset framework that I think Constance really emphasized. And that our biggest thing is to shift people's view from a deficit mentality with respect to the students to an asset mentality. And we do that even with, and especially with the students who others might claim have academic difficulties. When you unpack what academic difficulties are, you find out that it's a set of stackable moments when you can intervene, and that you have to intervene all along that way with an asset mentality. So what do I mean by that? Our Newark City of Learning Collaborative, which we are the backbone for, intersects with Newark Board of Education, with our public school district, hugely and on the ground to create dual enrollment course opportunities, pre-college course opportunities in a whole variety of ways. That is critical for demystifying college access. And what the college promise then adds to that, of course, in message value. But actually, we find that many of the students who would have had academic problems just entering without some real experience on the ground at Rutgers Newark, taking a dual enrollment course between their high school and us, makes a big difference. This year, we are starting a summer accelerator program for students because of potential learning loss and during COVID in high school. We're just starting this accelerator program for students who might have issues in math and in writing, so that they actually can do those potentially developmental courses before getting here. And we're paying for it before they get here in the summer, and then hopefully go right into our standard mapping program. The other thing, and I think Constance mentioned this, is we have a lot of students who have, let's say, 60 credits already, but they've stopped out, whether it's because of student debt or because of family crises or whatever, right? We're starting what we're calling Are You Rising, which is to forgive that student debt, bring those adult students back, and create a kind of cohort of support. Those, I mentioned that in the context, again, of, quote, academic issues, because I really think we have to unpack what's in that bucket, if you will, of academic issues. Who's in that bucket? A lot of times the issues are not genuinely academic. They are not having access to the right supports, not being able to get over the fears of what comes with navigating when you've been, for example, out of school. And then the third thing I would mention is the pathways, and I mentioned this before. We believe really strongly in what I call stackable institutions. You go from a collaboration with schools, districts, you go to the community college, you go to the four-year institution. Then you go on to career, and that we have to all be in that pathway. Our STEM students, for example, go from our 6 Hispanic serving county colleges to us as a Hispanic serving institution, on to, we hope, doctorates in STEM. And we are supported by a National Science Foundation to do a whole pathway there. Now, you might be thinking, Michael, wait, I asked her to talk about students with academic issues. Why is she talking about STEM? Well, I want to challenge the design team to take into account the notion that a lot of times students get told that they're having academic issues in STEM-related pathways. And that if we take those pathways seriously and make them open for exactly the students who will be the talent pool of the future, who will be in San Antonio, who will be in Newark, who will be in San Diego creating the new innovations, we will really make a big difference. And I'd love to see more of the promise intersection with the design groups be around the humanities pathways, the STEM pathways, the pathways that people don't think these individual students can make it in. We know they can make it. We've seen it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that inspirational passion, Nancy. Mike, would you like to comment, please, on the academic preparation students?
Sure, Michael. I want to pick up on the academic preparation. I think we really need to be bold, right? So we face intransigent challenges and multi-generational, for us, multi-generational poverty. But I think looking at assets, look at the assets that a family has, look at the assets and the support that our students, prospective students, have in enrolling with us, and being able to tap the capital and the family history, and being able to leverage small businesses, right, where an individual can go and start that. What it is how do we codify and capture and affirm the lived experience of our students, that actually if an individual was doing an odd jobs or had their own business, they were an entrepreneur. And so it's a matter of how do we codify and capture that. I think as educators, we need to reframe how we interact with each other and how we interact with our communities. I think as a community college, we've put more emphasis on the college than on the community. And I think that is really our charge going forward. Promise for us in Alamo was kind of our first foray in doing that. We have the superstructure to be able to ensure that our students are successful once they get here, but we need to be more intentional in our efforts to engage our communities and our prospective students where they are. So that can be at the laundromat, that could be at the bodega or the tienda that's on the corner, that could be with trusted sources in the community that can then vouch for us as a way to provide entree to the middle class through a credential. So I think that Promise for us has been a learning experience for the ways that we need to reframe how we engage with our community if we are to have a greater societal and individual impact.
This has been a great conversation. I have more to ask, but we have the hook coming, I think. So I want to thank you all for this. My next question was going to be a policy one, knowing, and I'll just leave it with you, and we can continue the conversation elsewhere. When we think about students with disabilities, we think about compliance first, and then some of the public policies that we could tap and increase to expand to cover those students. But all 5 student populations represent policy issues and challenges that we need to confront. So at some later point, we'll come back and talk about how we can address public policy to expand opportunities to support these students. Thank you very much for the conversation. And Catherine, thank you for the extra minute.
You're welcome, Michael. I want to add my thanks to Constance, Nancy, Michael Flores, and Michael Nettles. If I had to go to the dictionary today, Webster's does word of the day. I think our word of the day is talent. I really appreciate all the discussion around the talent that's in our communities, the talent our students have, and the work that all of you are doing to leverage their talent. So that's for me, my word of the day is talent. So thank you for that gift. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for these first 2 sessions. We're going to take a 15-minute break, stretch, get a coffee. You're welcome to stay on in the Zoom or logged into Zoom. And so we'll see you at 3 o'clock. But thank you, everyone. And thank you to all the panelists who've been with us the first part of today. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice break. And I want to thank all of our colleagues who were with us for the first session. Over the weekend, many of you may have gone to the movies. And when I go, I always enjoy the previews for coming attractions. So today, what we're asking our design team colleagues to do is to select a representative who will give a spark talk. And as the name implies, the goal of these talks is to spark your interest and thinking. And we want to spark the big ideas, ignite curiosity about a student population or perhaps populations, and spark the connections to your work. We encourage and invite all of you who are with us to consider yourself members of our community, to do the work on College Promise, and to be advocates for the student populations that we will be discussing today. And as we said, at the close of this calendar year, we will be thinking about the 10 student populations. So now we're going to hear from the teams. And I would like to ask Chrissy D'Alejandro, the Executive Director of Tennessee Achieves, who is a member of the First Generation Students team, to kick off the Spark Talks. And I also want to just publicly embarrass Chrissy and say, happy birthday, Chrissy. We're delighted you chose to spend your birthday with us. So Chrissy, over to you. Chrissy, are you with us? Okay, Sabrina, why don't we have you go ahead and start? And Sabrina Jackson is the MS program, the Master of Social Work Program Director and Assistant Professor at the University of Alabama. And she is a member of the Students in or Aged Out of Foster Care. So Sabrina, we'll have you go and we'll come back to Chrissy. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me? Whoa. I think we have a little echo here. All right, Catherine, are you hearing that echo as well, or is it just on my end?
No, we are. I think you may be logged in twice.
Okay.
Because I see your photo below and we see you live. That's the extent of my tech knowledge.
Well, let's see if we can fix that. Sorry about that.
Sabrina, I went ahead and removed the second copy of you, so it should be good now.
Wonderful, and I'm able to share my screen as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you know, we love technology, and sometimes it cooperates and sometimes it doesn't. But we're excited to be a part of this wonderful day. We've been looking forward to it for a while. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Alabama School of Social Work and direct our MSW program, but I'm just delighted to even have the opportunity also to direct a college access program for foster youth. I'm also just super excited to represent what I call Team Awesome in terms of our design team that came together to discuss expanding promise for students in or aged out of foster care. Our Team Awesome included Dr. Angelique Day, Dr. Lauren Ford, Ms. Angelique Salazan, and Catherine Lester. And Doug Harris also provided some initial consultation at the beginning of this process with our group. So let's just talk about why College Promise is important for students in or aged out of foster care. There are over 400,000 foster youth nationwide. Nearly 20,000 youth age out of the foster care system between the ages of 18 to 21. 80% of foster youth actually aspire to enroll in college. Unfortunately, though, only 20% actually enroll in college. And as they enroll in college, roughly 3 to 10% actually graduate from college with a bachelor's degree, which is why this conversation is so critical and so important for this population. This group faces multiple barriers as they transition from foster care into college. Some of those barriers include financial difficulties, needing to work, housing concerns, lack of supportive adults, mental health issues, just to name a few of the challenges. But I think it's also important not to just talk about the barriers and the challenges without also saying that this group also is super resilient. There are multiple strengths. Those who do make it to college and who are able to graduate from college are resourceful. They have grit, they have determination to succeed in spite of the obstacles that they face. And this College Promise model is really designed to increase the number that have access to this great opportunity. So there are a number of current programs that are designed to support youth who are transitioning or students who are transitioning from foster care into college and who are enrolled in college. There are pre-college or college access programs. There are programs like one that I run in the state of Alabama that's called the National Social Work Enrichment Program. There is the First Star Academy that keeps track of youth from high school graduation on into higher education. There are also campus support programs that are designed to support this population. Programs like Guardian Scholars in California, and there are programs in Michigan and Texas and other states. There are also some statewide initiatives that have been created to support this population. Some of those initiatives include the Fostering Success Michigan initiative, the Guardian Scholars program in California, I mentioned before, California Pathways to Success. There are REACH programs as well, REACH programs in the state of Alabama, in Florida, Georgia, Ohio, and Texas that are working to address the issues and barriers experienced by this population. There are also some national coordinating groups that have also convened to really address the challenges that this population faces. One group is called the Fostering Academic Achievement Nationwide Group, or we use the acronym FAN, F-A-A-N. There's also a national research consortium on foster alumni in higher education, and that group uses the acronym NRC-FAHE, and I hope you'll go to the websites to learn more about these coordinating groups. And finally, child welfare programs are also coming together to identify ways to support college access and college retention for this population. NE Casey has a program, the foundation has a program called Learn and Earn to Achieve Potential, also known as the LEAP program that's designed for this group. As our group came together to think about what College Promise or what a model would look like for this population, we thought about 5 key areas that are really key and really important. I hope you can see the wonderful graph that one of our team members, Dr. Ford, created for us for the presentation. We believe this population needs financial support, of course, as we think about College Promise traditionally does, but we also, beyond tuition and beyond those resources, youth also need information or financial support as it relates to fees and books. And I think from other presentations, we heard a little bit more about the financial support being provided. We also believe that this group, we need to establish campus support programs at institutions across the country, whether that's at a 4-year institution or our 2-year college campuses. We need designated programs for this population. Those designated programs also need designated space on their campuses so that youth are able to have a place to assemble and to find support and find community in those places. In addition to financial support and the establishment of campus programs, this population also needs personal support. That personal support can include access to their basic needs, from housing to healthcare, mental health care access, childcare, and even housing, and finally transportation. These are things that we often don't address or think about sometimes in the current programs, but youth also need this personal support. They need social and emotional support. And finally, a College Promise model should also include collaboration with local agencies in those college communities and collaboration with community partners. And our paper talks a lot more in detail about who those agencies need to be and who those partners should be as well. But as I wrap up our talk, we think it's important because college attainment predicts increased employment and it predicts earnings in the general population, of course, we know the benefits can be even greater for students in or aged out of the foster care system. If college completion, not just attendance, if it's going to be an earnest goal for us, policymakers, practitioners, educators, we have to address this particular population. We need more attention to be paid to addressing the unique barriers that this student population faces, this student group that's in or aged out of the foster care as they pursue higher education attainment. And I'll close with a quote from Ebony, who received her BSW and also recently received her MSW. Ebony shared, graduating from college meant that I won. It meant that my father was wrong when he said I was stupid and lazy and a waste of space. Most of all, it meant that I would gain the knowledge to use my experience to help other people. College meant freedom from my past. It meant the ability to choose my future. And we believe, our design team believes a College Promise model program for students in or aged out of foster care will make a tremendous difference for all those who are like Ebony, who want a better future. And we believe education truly is that difference maker that gives them that opportunity. Thank you so much.
Sabrina, thank you. What a powerful quote to end on. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We look forward to the session tomorrow. So I heard that Chrissy's internet crashed, but now she's back. So we're going to go back to Chrissy and ask if Chrissy will do the Spark Talk for the first generation team. Chrissy, it's over to you now.
Hello, can you hear me? Fantastic. I'm so excited to share with you the work from the first generation team. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a highly competitive person. So I will say that not only was this a pleasure to work with my team members, but also I think we were the most fun out of all the teams, although I've not met all the other teams, and I'm certain we just had a really great time digging into a population that we are all incredibly passionate about. The majority of our team are actually first generation students. So not only are we practitioners and those who study this work, but we also are deeply invested, considering this was our journey as well. Adnan being a second generation, he also was deeply invested in this work. Before I jump into the actual guts of our paper, if you will, I think it's really important to ground us in what is a first generation student. For me, neither of my parents went to college. In fact, my mom dropped out of high school. And so I have some very real memories of feeling very alone in the space of transitioning from high school to post-secondary, making the leap, if you will, as the first one in my family. What we know about first generation students is that oftentimes it's really hard to identify, as someone who's worked with also thousands, hundreds of thousands of students, first generation students, making up the majority of students in the Tennessee Achieves program that I lead in Tennessee. They also have a difficult time identifying themselves. They have a cousin perhaps that started at college but dropped out. And so we had a difficult time just really trying to figure out what is a first generation student. But what we did find is that about 35% of US undergraduates identify as a first generation student. We wanted to dig in, although we did take very much an asset versus a deficit mindset in this work. We did want to dig into some of the challenges, one of which is we know that first generation students are often less likely to access post-secondary, but more likely to leave prior to earning a post-secondary credential. You see here, there is a huge difference between those students who identify as first generation as well as coming from a low income background. Only 26% earning a 4-year degree in 6 years, versus their non-first generation, non-low income peers earning at a 70% rate over the course of 6 years. And what we've tried to identify is the idea is thinking about the institutional, financial, and bureaucratic obstacles that are preventing our first generation students from finding success. Because what we know is that although these access and completion rates are much lower than their peers, they also have very big dreams and aspirations. First generation students, why are they dropping out? And what we're finding is the research tells us 54% are reporting a lack of finances. We've heard multiple panels today discussing this idea around affordability. They lack the knowledge of scholarships, they lack the knowledge of programs and resources designed specifically for them, but that lack of finance and this actually cost
So I'm not sure if Chrissy's internet has crashed again. Yeah, we definitely lost Chrissy. I just heard. So we're gonna move to another team and then see how we can go back to the first gen. So it turns out that the next one we were going to hear from was students with disabilities, and that's Emily Tarkanosh from the University of Connecticut. So Emily, we'll go live to you now, and then we know Chrissy is determined, so we will hear the rest of the talk afterwards. Emily, let's hear about
Sounds
your
good.
work.
I'm right here. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Let's go to slideshow. Okay, everybody should be able to see my screen now. Yes? Great. I'm just going to take 5 quick minutes, as everybody, and share with you a little bit about the landscape of students with disabilities, what that population looks like, and some of the issues that they're experiencing. And then I'll quick give a little roundup of how we can help. All right. So this is a quick rundown of the current population of students with disabilities. Spoiler alert, they're growing. About 3/4 of high school students with IEPs, or those who receive special education services, plan to go on to college and complete it. But by the time that population actually comes to college, only about 30% of them disclose their disability and request accommodations. So when we think about it, most of the students who use accommodations and likely needed them in high school aren't using those accommodations in college. And we'll talk in a slide or two about some of those reasons that's happening, but that's important to know. A lot of students on higher ed campuses experience disabilities, but the reported number when we flash forward to college, about 20% of undergraduates self-disclose accommodation or self-disclose their disability and request accommodations. And this number is likely an estimate, as we just said. So some of the commonly reported disabilities in post-secondary education you can do in this chart. And I'll just tell you the most common right now is actually falls under psychiatric disabilities, namely anxiety disorders, followed by ADHD, and then specific learning disabilities and language impairments kind of are the third and fourth most frequent diagnoses self-disclosed. But again, I want you to remember that everybody in all of these groups is definitely growing. Population is rapidly getting bigger, and hopefully that means it's because more people have supports. Unfortunately, though, even though the population is growing, they're not achieving comparable academic outcomes to their peers without disabilities. That's true in high school settings. 84% of students without disabilities graduate compared to 66% of their peers with disabilities. And that number gets a little bit more accentuated in higher education settings. We have 84% of students without disabilities graduating versus 61. And then that number, a little less, but similar when we look at post-secondary education completion rates. In a period of about 6 years, this data reflects, about half of students without disabilities graduate, whereas that number is about a third for students with disabilities. So we definitely know that these discrepancies exist. And the next slide is going to tell us a little bit about why. So researchers have really dove into this data to figure out, why aren't students with disabilities graduating? Well, the number one reason they indicate is cost. Like all students who go to college, cost can be really overwhelming and hard to pay for, even if you're getting financial aid. But I definitely want everyone to think about it, that issue not only affects students with disabilities in similar ways, but having a disability also costs a lot of money, whether it mean paying for medication, medical services, psychiatric services, therapeutic services, or those academic supports that students might need, like extra tutoring, assistive technology devices, maybe they need like an executive function coach. Basically, if the college doesn't offer it, if they don't consider it a reasonable support and they think students should do it on their own, that kind of sticks students with disabilities with the bill. So bottom line, cost is the number one reason students with disabilities reported dropping out of higher ed. Another big reason is, like I said earlier, they're not accessing accommodations. Only about 1/3 of students with disabilities self-disclose their disability. And again, it's even less than that, about 20% actually use the accommodations that are necessary for them to receive access to the curriculum. There's a handful of reasons students have disclosed and researchers have uncovered that this is happening. And a lot of them relate to a lack of awareness. Students like myself, I'm a student with a disability, and until I got to grad school, I didn't know disability services existed. And that definitely caused me a lot of problems in my undergraduate career. So many students like me either don't know about disability services, don't know their disability qualifies them, they don't know what kind of paperwork they need to prove that disability. So awareness is a big factor in self-disclosure. It also influences the number one reason students report not self-disclosing: fear or experience of stigma and discrimination. I've talked to so many students with disabilities who said the same thing. I know I need accommodations. I need, whether it be extra time on tests or audiobooks, but I don't want anyone to find out I have a disability. I don't want my professor to judge me. I don't want people to think I have it easier because I'm using accommodations. Side note, accommodations do not make the curriculum easier or make it easier for anybody. They just provide access or a different way of getting that knowledge or showing you know it. But anyway, fear or experience of stigma and discrimination is one of the biggest reasons students with disabilities do not self-disclose. And lastly, in order to use accommodations in college, most colleges require you to have documentation of your disability. It's not a legal requirement. The Americans with Disabilities Act says it's up to colleges to determine what they require of students, but most colleges still require documentation. And if we think back to the two most prominent disability groups, psychiatric disabilities, ADHD, and we'll throw in learning disabilities too, that would require a neuropsychological evaluation. And those start at thousands of dollars. Insurance doesn't pay for it. And after you get out of high school, it's up to the student to finance their own documentation of disability. So think about the huge discrepancy that creates in who's able to afford that documentation and then access services. So those are some of the big reasons that college students with disabilities are not accessing supports. We're finishing. So our team came up with some recommendations to improve this, and they really fall around two main areas: ways to increase awareness and ways to financially support students with disabilities. So programs like College Promise that make these issues well known and start the conversation is a great starting step. But our group also recommends creating some kind of funding to maybe create a national training about disability awareness and the types of accommodations that are available, as well as students' legal rights as students. Again, I was a student with a disability for 6 years in college in my master's program, and no one ever told me I was able to get accommodations. And that is such a true statement for so many people in our country. So we really want to create a national training to dispel or to propagate disability awareness. The other suggestions we have include creating some funding mechanisms to support students and their extra needs. Another common accommodation is taking a reduced course load. That's something I did in college. but often when you take a reduced course load, it can mess up your financial aid. So our team recommends rethinking the federal financial aid formula to include students who are taking fewer credits. And then as I talked about documentation or any additional needs that students have that they have to finance themselves, we really recommend creating some kind of student financial support on a federal level to really ameliorate some of these needs. And then on my last slide, I have some recommendations. We're not going to go over these now, but there are things that we recommend that high school teachers, facilitators, parents, students can do at the high school level to really prepare students to do as well as they can in post-secondary education and really gain that access that they need.
Emily, that was great. And I really want to single out Emily and some of our other students who are graduate students who have joined the teams. And Emily will be finishing her degree soon, but that was a great talk, Emily. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So now I'd like to turn our attention to students who are parents. And I'm delighted that Lindsay Richland Cruz from the Institute of Women's Policy Research will talk about the work that her team has been doing. So Lindsay, over to you now.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. Let me just go ahead and pull up my screen. All right. Well, thank you so much. My name is Lindsay Richland Cruz, as you just heard, and I want to first give a shout out to my amazing design team that I've been able to collaborate with on coming up with a college promise model for students with children. And thanks to ETS and College Promise Campaign as well for coordinating this event and giving us this opportunity. So I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about the population of student parents. For those of you who aren't familiar, there are nearly 4 million undergraduates who are parents of dependent children, and that's about 22% of all college students. And these student parents tend to overlap with a lot of different student groups that are the focus of equity initiatives and similar interventions to improve college success. So, for example, student parents are a slight majority of students of racial and ethnic backgrounds that are non-white, and Black and Indigenous women in college are particularly likely to be raising children while pursuing a credential. Student parents are also a majority first-generation college students. They're a majority of adult learners who are 30 or older. Most are living with low incomes or incomes that are below the poverty threshold. And thanks to the Hope Center, we know that student parents are likely to report experiencing food and housing insecurity and at rates that are higher than their peers without children. And the other thing we know about student parents, and Wakisha this morning or earlier today spoke eloquently about her experience, we know that they're experiencing time poverty. There are a lot of different responsibilities on student parents' plates. Most student parents have children who are childcare aged, so ages 0 to 5. Single mothers in particular, when they don't have that extra support, they're spending significant amount of time per day on care and housework. And student parents are also working. Over half are working at least 25 hours a week. And all this together can lead student parents to have to delay their college plans. And you can see this quote from a student mom who we interviewed for a study at IWPR, who says, "The biggest challenge is time. Do I have enough time and energy to maintain finances, classes, and my home?" And this results in poorer outcomes for student parents, not because they don't have the academic chops. We know that student parents have higher GPAs than students without children overall. But unfortunately, we see that just 17% graduate within 6 years of enrolling in college. And just 5% of student parents are earning a BA in that time, compared with a significant proportion of what are considered the dependent student population, or excuse me, the traditional student population or dependent students. And I think this quote from Adrienne, another student mom we've spoken with, really puts it poignantly that campuses are not set up to serve students with children, students with family responsibilities of their own. There's hardly anything out there for adult single parents, and it makes them feel like outliers, which is of course the opposite of what a campus should feel like for any of its student body. So for the purposes of this initiative, our team decided that we would assume there was a college promise model already in place that took care of the tuition and fees aspect. And we instead decided to focus on the aspects of a promise model that would be necessary and unique to the student parent population in particular. So drawing on what we know about what can help student parents persist and complete, we put together a model that encompasses the supports you see here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So a core component of this model has to be the childcare piece. There's a slew of research that shows that access to childcare increases persistence and completion, and the lack of it can lead students to leave college without a degree. So this promise would be that every student in need of a childcare slot would receive one on or off campus. Students who qualify for federal anti-poverty programs would pay nothing, and there would be a sliding scale for the small share of student parents who have higher incomes, but ensuring that they don't pay more than 7% of their income on care. Care would be provided at the highest quality. It would be flexible for students' schedules, and it would be portable if they desired to move to a new center alongside a transfer, for example. And we'd also incorporate campus-based policies, classroom policies to accommodate, for example, excused absences for family care needs and that type of thing. And then we would also, we would need to focus on the wraparound supports beyond childcare. We know that student parents have higher unmet financial need. They have higher costs related to childcare, but also housing, providing food for their family. So the suite of wraparound supports that would be part of this would include discretionary resources to help student parents remain economically stable and secure while pursuing a degree. It would also work to make sure that all student parents have basic needs security, particularly food and housing. And then thinking about more holistically the range of factors that can affect completion, health and wellness, making sure that there are access to affordable healthcare services or referrals to where they can get those, institutional practices that are flexible and accommodating and assume or understand the different factors that come with having a family while in college. And then finally, case management, which has been shown to increase persistence and completion among similar populations to make sure that student parents have individualized support to connect them to resources. So with that, I'll stop there. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. So I should have anticipated this question and I didn't. So Martha just texted me. Whenever colleagues present a treasure trove of data, we're always asked, can I get the slides? So over the course of the evening, we will figure out how to do that. But I can tell you for sure that in the final report and other materials, we will be sharing some of these data because our teams have done an amazing job of picking out the really important data to share with you. And I just got a message we're going to add to the resource page after the event. Okay, so now we're gonna switch gears and we're going to go to students needing academic support, which was one of the topics that Michael Nettles probed with the institutional leaders before the break. And I'm delighted that Toby Park-Gannon at Florida State University is going to talk about what their team has been thinking about. So Toby, over to you, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for attending today, and thank you to ETS and College Promise for inviting us, and thank you to the wonderful design team that you see up on the screen. I will move through this quickly and let you know that the context matters for students who need academic support. The reality is that all the students who arrive at college are prepared for college level work, and that in the past, developmental education courses have been the primary mechanism to support the students who need academic support. But the traditional models for remediation aren't working. So you've heard already today, let's not be resistant to change, let's embrace it. So the question we've been asking is, how can state systems and colleges improve the current ecosystem for students who need academic support? So what I'll talk to you about today are the handful of areas, 7 of them, that we saw a unique scenario facing these students and offer a recommendation for how states, systems, and individual colleges could stand to improve overall access. The first is with placement testing. You heard Martin earlier today talk about how he placed 1 point shy of the college level placement exam and was required to take developmental education. We see a lot of students in this underplacement model where they perhaps could have been successful in the college level course, but when they use single metric testing are placed in the lower level course. Our recommendation here is to use multiple measures. So get away from using a single test to place students into courses and instead use a variety of different academic indicators. California is already doing this, Florida is already doing this, and I think COVID has taught a lot of us that we can all do this. Orientation. You hear a lot about how the quality of orientation and the access to orientation can sometimes be a difficulty for certain students, and particularly students who need academic support. So we're promoting is a robust pre-enrollment orientation. You heard Nancy speak a little bit about this today, that at the university there, they're doing dev ed, and it sounds like orientation before you even start. So do it over the course of the summer. We think that's a great idea. Academic support services. You've heard a lot about this already today, about access to these services, knowledge that they exist in the first place, and then sometimes the stigma associated with utilizing them. We're proposing comprehensive college transition programs that really involve everything from academic support, but also access to other campus resources and so forth. Instructional strategies. Traditional models of dev ed typically tend to be an entire year or longer. And what that does is set up multiple exit points. So you take Dev Ed 1, you could potentially drop out there, Dev Ed 2, and so forth. We're pushing for co-requisite developmental education models, where students take a developmental course in the same semester as the college level course. Texas is already doing this statewide. Tennessee has initiatives in this area. Florida has this as an option. Many other states are considering this as well. The last three areas are course pathways. You've heard this already today as well. But what we're taking the angle is that not all majors may require the same courses, especially in math. So why not have differential pathways by major, especially for gateway math courses? Instructor PD, this is something that we saw here in Florida. Not all instructors at a college have credentials to teach all level of courses. And it might be that faculty members teaching gateway or introductory college level courses may never have taught students with academic needs, with higher levels of academic need before. So what we're going to promote is to provide PD or professional development for all faculty teaching these college level courses. And then our last point up here is around collaboration and communication. We find so often that there are silos at the colleges in terms of this team is working on this initiative, this team is working on this initiative, and a knowledge gap develops. What we promote then is to foster an intentional collaboration across departments and sectors. I'll give you an example. St. Pete College here in Florida, when developmental education reform happened in Florida, they had training modules for every single layer and every single level of employee at that college, including individuals who worked in the cafeteria, because a lot of times they're doing a lot of informal advising and others in those capacity. So those are our 7 recommendations. They're based on unique scenarios that we saw. And again, I can't thank ETS and College Promise enough and the rest of my design team members. So I look forward to spending the rest of the conference with you.
Toby, thank you very much for that. And I do want to make sure that later on we go back to Nancy Cantor's challenge to your team to think about how we bring students into majors that they may have been discouraged from before. So I want to put that out there. So I am looking to see if Chrissy is back. I know we had, or she had a technical difficulty. If not, I might ask if anyone else from the first generation team would just like to give any remarks. Just trying to see if anyone else is here. All right, well, this is not our first time with a team, so we will, if Chrissy comes back, we'll give her some time, but right now I think I will hand the program over to Martha Cantor, who will introduce Governor Haslam's participation in the program. Martha?
Thanks, Catherine. It's been what a day it's been, and how much information and how much overlap and distinctiveness I'm seeing in all the presentations starting at 1 o'clock. So thank you all. I'm delighted to introduce Governor Haslam. He led the state of Tennessee for 2 terms from 2011 through 2019. So he's been out of office for almost 2 years. And before his election, he had just completed 8 years as the mayor of Knoxville, where he built the Knox Promise and the intermediary infrastructure, which is Tennessee Achieves. That's the infrastructure that Chrissy Delejandro leads. So to accomplish all of this, and this is true for, I would say, the majority, most, if not all, of the College Promise programs, he worked in close collaboration with education, business, government, nonprofit, foundation leaders, and students on the Promise design that he then took from Knox to the state of Tennessee. They built on the local innovations, but they also kept changing the program, adding features, modifying things in the design to create the lessons learned that would drive the Tennessee Promise and the research-based evidence from the early years of the Knox Promise. So it was many years in the making. This doesn't happen overnight. You can put it in place, but if you don't have the evidence, you're doing things that you want to make sure you evaluate. So then on May 13th, 2014, Governor Haslam signed the Tennessee Promise legislation into law after winning overwhelming support from the state's legislators. And so they were able to offer tuition-free community and technical college. So, in our definition of College Promise, we include career technical, comprehensive community colleges, and now a growing number of 4-year colleges and universities. And in Tennessee, they made sure that a promise was universal, available to every high school senior across the state who would graduate regardless of income or zip code. Mentors and community service opportunities were given to every Promise student, all to meet the overarching goal to get a well-educated, workforce-prepared set of residents for Tennessee who would drive up the number of college-educated individuals who could drive the economy, the prosperity, and who were seeking to further increase their success. So they concentrated a lot on not only access, but persistence and completion. I think everyone in Tennessee will say access isn't enough. It's got to be about completion and jobs and community life. So in 2017, from 2014, Governor Haslam expanded the promise to the state adult population by enacting Tennessee Reconnect. And you're seeing Reconnect programs in a number of states. You saw it in Michigan, we see it in Arkansas, in Kentucky, many other states, to get adults to come back into college, career training, and move forward in the high demand fields. In addition to the last dollar scholarships, after state and federal aid is applied, the Tennessee Promise gives students mentors. It provides proactive interventions, success coaches that track the students to and through completion, summer bridge programs. You heard about transitions from the groups that have spoken this afternoon, job shadowing, and above all, frequent and intentional communications. All of this designed to help students stay on track, curb dropout, and succeed not only in college, but through their work, their careers, and community lives. The big goal is to get many, many other students ready for college and through college. It was interesting to us that last year, the University of Tennessee announced its own Promise program. That has happened in many states. They have joined with community colleges. They have added on to the 2-year with a 4-year opportunity. And many of the programs are adding other features to help more students succeed, especially now in recovery from COVID. The learning loss is great. There's got to be these partnerships that drive student success. So not only is Governor Haslam widely known as the architect of the Tennessee Promise, but just last week he announced a new book, Faithful Presence, The Promise and Peril of Faith in the Public Square. I can recommend it. It's interesting. And he's also returned once again, which is so heartening for his commitment to education, to serve on the Tennessee Achieves board. That's the board that champions and delivers results for the Tennessee Promise. So he is nonstop, he is tireless, and I'm thrilled he could prepare these remarks for us. Please welcome the Honorable Bill Haslam. Well, I don't see that the voice is active.
Wish that I could be with you in person. This would be. Hello, I'm Bill Haslam, and I wish that I could be with you in person. This would be a much more enjoyable conversation to be looking at your faces and having a real conversation. But I am pleased to be here. As they said, I'm the former governor, which what I've learned in this is you get to be former a lot faster than you might think. The Australians have a saying, rooster today, feather duster tomorrow. And I'm in the feather duster stage of life. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and was in my hometown last week walking downtown, and somebody grabbed me and said, I know you used to be somebody, but I can't remember who you used to be. And so I'm in that used to be somebody. But one of the things that is dear to my heart is what you're talking about today. When you're in office as governor, you see so many problems and issues, and you realize sometimes that they tie together a lot more than you might have first thought. And one of those was I looked and I saw so many of the social and health issues and problems we had. And I saw so many challenges with jobs, with companies that wanted to fill those jobs and people who wanted jobs, but there wasn't a match and there wasn't a preparation level. And I saw so many families who would love to have the opportunity for more education, but they just didn't have the financial wherewithal to do that. So I was blessed in that before I was governor, I was the mayor of Knoxville, and in our county then, some people asked me to help them start what we called Knox Promise, the idea that had every student in Knox County be able to have 2 years free of community college or technical school. And we did that by raising philanthropic dollars. And the idea worked. And so some other cities in Knoxville copied us, but we all realized this would be a hard thing to keep going. If we're having to rely on donated money, there'll be a time when somebody either won't want to give that money, or whoever's in office won't feel like going out and raising the money. And so that wasn't really a sustainable model. So when I got in office, some folks, a couple of people here, a guy named Randy Boyd, who now is the president of the University of Tennessee, but came at the time to help us on higher education issues, said, what if we could take what we did in Knoxville and expand it everywhere and be able to tell the parent of a newborn, when your daughter or son gets to college age, they can go for free. And so we started out working on putting together Tennessee Promise, this great idea of can we be able to tell people that 2 years free of community college or technical school, regardless of your ability to pay, as long as you've graduated from high school, that we would do that. So we went to work on it, and we came up with a financial plan to do that, and we became the first state to offer that. And it felt like one of those really big seminal moments in our state. And I remember the night I announced it to the legislature in a State of the State speech. And I think everybody kind of looked and said, well, how are we going to do that? And as we walked through it at the end ended up being an easy idea to sell, because people got it. They understood, like I did, that so many of the jobs of the future were going to require a degree or certificate. And we weren't serving our people well, nor were we serving our businesses and other job creators well if we didn't help more people have that degree. What I quickly learned was there are so many people who just said, college is not for me. We don't do that in our family. And so our goal was to change the conversations around dinner tables around the state from what am I going to do after high school to where am I going to go to college? And we loved the community college idea for several reasons. One, the geographic proximity of our community colleges and their branches spread around the state. Number two, community colleges by their very nature are much more flexible. They can adapt their course offerings, and we have seen them do that and still do that. And I know you all are focusing a lot on some of our populations that haven't had high success rates, so whether it be children out of the foster system or disabled families with disabled members or veterans. And so what we see and hoped was that our community colleges could craft programs specifically for those populations and others, and could hear from the businesses in their community that says, you know, we really need more of these type graduates, and would adjust to that. So I was really pleased with how well our schools adapted to that. So obviously we kicked off the program. It was a big success. It did what we wanted. It attracted first generation college students, which was a big issue. It attracted low income students who previously weren't considering college. And it opened up the realms of possibility. We did discover some problems. We discovered some low completion rates. And so we drilled down to see what happened. Historically, community colleges haven't had the greatest completion rates for a variety of reasons. But as we looked at it, there were a couple of things that stood out. The first was, were the students prepared when they got there? And if they hadn't been adequately prepared in K-12, it was almost impossible for our community colleges to help them keep up. And so we started working harder to connect the K-12 experience to the free college offer. And I tried to spread the message, you know, it's not about access to college, it's about success. And success depended on preparation when you got there. And it's one of the reasons I worked so hard to insist that our schools have high standards for graduation, and not just set the bar so low that you could graduate and it wouldn't mean anything. And it's like I said, we worked so hard on having high standards and having assessments where we can measure what our students were learning. So that was part of it on the front end, to make certain students were prepared. On the back end, once they got there, because we noticed when students didn't complete, so often it was about life interrupting. You know, I'm 12 miles for school. There's not a bus route, and my car broke down, or my parent got sick, or you know, my boss required me to work different hours, or just all the different ways in which life interrupted, and particularly in our most vulnerable populations. And so what we've started to add on a little bit through the state, but more often and locally based, is to have wraparound services for those students. But like I said, particularly our most vulnerable and our first generation college students, who find it a little easier just to say, I'll set aside college for now and I'll come back. And we all know that the longer it takes you to complete, the less likely you are to complete. So our big learnings have been, hey, this is the right idea. I passionately believe that college access programs like this are the right ones. But we also, I believe just as strongly, we're not doing anybody a favor if that student gets there and is not prepared when he or she gets there. And then the other thing is, we have to be realistic. And when life happens to these students in ways beyond their control that will mean them having to interrupt their college experience, it's really helpful if we can begin to think through what are those, again, I don't know a better term than wraparound services, the things that might help that student get over that current hurdle so they can actually complete. Let me just, as I finish up, thank you all for doing this. Thanks for being a part. One of the things that's fun for me, like I said, I'm a former governor now, but I can't tell you how frequently, I bet 3 times a week, somebody will grab me and say, thanks, I got a chance to go to college because of that. Or my son or daughter is there now finishing, and they thank me. Now, I just kind of happen to be the visible face. The reality is there were high school counselors and community college professionals and teachers and parents and so many other people around the state that helped make this happen. But I think the fact that there's always such a visible outpouring of gratitude around this shows how strongly people feel. And the last story I'll tell is this: when I was in the governor's office, there was a woman who worked on the cleaning staff at the governor's residence. And she decided when we announced, we started with Tennessee Promise for high school graduates. We expanded to Tennessee Reconnect for anybody, adults. And when we added that for adults, she said, I'm going to do that. And so it was fun for me because I would see her every morning before I went out to work, and she would tell me about how hard school was, and she didn't think she was going to make it, but she did, and she got and completed the first semester. And I knew that ultimately she would probably, when she got that degree, probably it might mean we'd lose her because she could maybe qualify for a better opportunity. But that's the whole name of it. And I could literally see her family. She came to an event and brought her family, her children, and I could tell how proud they were of her. So at the end of the day, when we're thinking about all these programs and all the different specific tactics we want to increase access and completion, remember behind that, there's folks the trajectory of their lives will be changed because of what you're doing. So thanks. It's really fun to be a part of this effort with you, and thanks for allowing me to be here. Wish it were alive.
Well, I want to thank Governor Haslam. I know he joined us by video, but his words were important, and I think continued many of the themes we've already heard about. The students that we're talking about today are students who might do college differently than it was done in the past centuries, but they have the talent to do it, and all of you today have helped us begin to think about how we can make it possible. So I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I just want to close out with a couple of messages as we end the day. So we will be back again. There's time to register for the June 9th session. We invite you to tell colleagues about this and come back. Maria Evans' sketch notes will be out tomorrow morning, and I really do encourage you to take a look at these. She's incredibly talented in the work she's done to capture our conversations. I'm already excited about it. We are encouraging people to post on social media. We've been out there in LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next Wednesday, we will be here at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Michael, Martha, and myself. Tomorrow is a day where the design teams are going to be thinking about some of what they've heard today, and we'll meet with some other colleagues to kind of refine their design. So some of you will be back with us tomorrow. For those of you who may only be able to join us today, we want to say let's stay connected. And I'd like to tell you about some of the ways we hope to stay connected with all of you as we do this. This is a movement for us. We've now had, probably by the end of this meeting, we'll have had 500 people or so with us. So we have been doing webinars, and I want to thank the College Promise colleagues for hosting webinars with the students, with some of the scholars, and just thinking about how we get the word out. And these are usually free and available to the public. We are delighted to start to think about an in-person convening. In the past, these have been on the campus of ETS, and we've also been in Washington with College Promise. So if we start to get together in person, we'll let you know. We will be having a forthcoming report through this that ETS will publish through Wiley Online, so it's open access. And our colleagues with College Promise have done great jobs of thinking about policy briefs. In fact, we already have a couple policy briefs out with the members of the foster care team. I think it's been great to hear today about thinking about advocacy and legislation and where the states and our federal government can play a role. And again, we're on social media, so we try to, both of our organizations, announce any events that we have. So let me just end by saying thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you also to the ETS and College Promise team that are behind the scenes that you're not going to meet today, but if you were with us in person, they're there. They've been running things behind the scenes for us. And if you have more thoughts about the papers, if you're not able to join us again, please send them to us at perkevents@ets.org. As we said, these papers are in draft format. We are going to have another version of them in the coming weeks, and we really do welcome your insights for the teams to consider. So again, on behalf of of College Promise and ETS, I want to thank you all for being with us today, for the amazing talks, and I hope you all have a lovely evening or the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.